Okay, this is part 2 of the video. If you missed part 1, I really encourage you to watch it sometime. Again, my name's Dan Becker, and I've been doing these presentations since 1989 in schools. I worked 30 years in all around area schools doing prevention. My biggest thing was prevention. I bet I've done drug abuse prevention for almost 30,000, 40,000 kids over all these years. Sometimes a gymnasium full of 300 at one time. And where we were at in the most previous part 1, we're on part 2 now, is that I've got a brain tumor, and I've only got a few months left to live. I got maybe, I don't know, 3 months maybe left to live. But this is a picture of me. And how did I get this brain tumor? Well, my grandfather, he smoked Camel No Filter, 2 packs of cigarettes every day. He died when I was 10 years old. And so this is a thing by the American Cancer Society. And the first one, I don't know if you'll be able to see it from that camera, but this is a brain right here that's got a little bit of a smoker, or somebody who's living around with a smoker. This one here is somebody who's not a smoker, or who's not living with a smoker. And over here, you got a full-blown pack-a-day cigarette smoker, or somebody who's living with the same house with a cigarette smoker. And these are tar balls, and tar balls are sticky. To a 7th grader. This presentation was geared towards 7th and 8th graders, so it's not a medical school presentation. It's really got to be brought down to the 7th and 8th grade level. So to a 7th and 8th grader, tar balls are sticky. We heat up tar on a road because a road to stick together. We heat up tar on a roof because a roof to stick together. When we're making a road, we throw class 5 gravel out there, but it takes the tar to hold that whole thing together. Right at this point in time in our history, we got a lot of 3-tab shingles all the way around. That's very popular when you're doing houses. Well, they put a little strip of tar across there that's supposed to hold that shingle together for 25 years. So tar balls are sticky. All right, and so I said to the kids, why don't you go out to the bus stop? We got 3 plexiglass walls on the school bus stop out there, and I said, why don't you get up a big old spit, get a big old goober, and get a big long cookie and spit on that window. I'm not going to do that. Yeah, go ahead and do it. No, I'm not going to do that. Why would I do that? Just go ahead and do it. All right, take a person who doesn't smoke out there and let them spit too. All you smokers, your spit will still be on there tomorrow, and you non-smokers, it'll be gone. Now, I'm going to bring something else out here and show you, and that is what's very popular is the the electronic stuff, or the vaporizing. And so from the video, you may not be able to see it, but just vaporizing anything right now at this point in our history, right now nothing is regulated. And so the e-cigarettes, a lot of kids say, well, what about the e-cigarettes? Those got to be safe. And so what the lungs of the e-cigarettes look like could be popcorn lungs or raisin lungs is one of the terms you call them. So with regular dry tobacco, you got to hang it up in a barn and let it dry out. So a lot of the chemicals, the herbicides, the pesticides, everything they spray down there to kill the bugs and the bunnies and the poisons and all that, that's still on there. So they got to bring it up barn, hang it and dry out. They don't wash it like that. Well, the e-cigarettes, because there's moisture there, it's a lot more of a coagulating effect in the lungs. At least this is what we know right now at the time of this video. So you get these clumps of stuff in your lungs. And so just because you're vaporizing it, a lot of teenagers think, well, that takes out all the toxins. It takes out all the impurities. It cools the smoke as it comes into my lungs. And they got all the things to say about it. And I said, well, you know, that's another example of a funny thing that I won't get into that story. But so anyway, what do the cigarette companies know and when do they know it? And so I'm just going to show you real quick here. This is an advertisement from the 1970s, extra low tar. Why did they spend $1 million on that? Okay, this one right here is Winston's, and that says the most low tar cigarette. Why did they spend $1 million on that? Rich Lights had the most low tar cigarette. Why did they spend $1 million on that? True, they claimed in the 70s they had the lowest in tar cigarette right there, lowest in tar. All right, Camels has always claimed that they were the lowest in tar. Kent always claimed that they were the lowest in tar. This one right here, Old Gold, is my favorite one of the bunch because it says lowest in tars and resins. The reason why this is my favorite is because this came out in 1944. And what that means in 1944 is we knew. We knew that tumors was causing, we knew that tar was causing tumors and cancers and killing people. And look how long it took, how many decades it took for that message to get out to where people would understand that doing these chemicals and getting them in your lungs is causing tumors and cancers. And at that point, it was the tar. And that's because they were smoking. Well, now with the vaporizing, you know, just because you get a clump in your lungs, this can easily cause cancer too. It's just a clump of whatever you vaporized or however you got it in your body. Even if you're doing sticky, we're going to talk about the edibles and the stickiness of the chemicals in your body. And so I'll show you one more here. And this is Golden Lights, and they're claiming they got lower than tar than all these other cigarettes combined. And how did they do that? Well, at this point in time in our history, we had there's all kinds of tobacco, but the tobacco that we as humans enjoyed, there was a long cut tobacco, which grows in Cuba and closer to the equator, and it's just the leaves are longer, and that's good for chopping up and making chewing cigars. And then you got short cut tobacco, which is a shorter leaf, and that is grown in Virginia and Tennessee and around that area of the planet. And so those, you bring them in a barn, hang it up, and let it dry out, and those are good for cigarettes. All right. Well, we learned how to extract nicotine a long time ago. So if I took nicotine out, I extracted it. Now we got fake synthetic nicotine, but at the time, if I dump all kinds of nicotine out of a shortcut tobacco leaf, I'm increasing the amount of nicotine, therefore I would be decreasing the amount of tar, was what they were telling us, what the tobacco companies and things were saying at the time. So if this cigarette claimed they had the lowest in tar, that meant they had the highest in what? For this time was always the nicotine. And it didn't, there was a whole bunch of lawsuits back in the 1990s. It took a long time to get through, but to a 7th grader, what you need to know is they advertise it in the magazines right down to the milligram. It wasn't all that hard to prove because they told us right down to the milligram. They knew exactly how much was in there because, yeah, they put it in there, all right? And so here's another thing that I can say something about lights, because there's a lot of older people that are going to watch this video that understand that we used to have lights. So at one time, they tried to tell you that cigarettes were better for you. This right here is a leaf. So you go all the way over here, this is a leaf. And it could be a marijuana leaf or a tobacco leaf, doesn't matter, but it's a natural leaf of a chemical. They took out the stems and the seeds and the rough stuff, and they put it in this pile, and they were calling that cheap, generic, junky cigarettes. They called it Liggett and Misty and Grand Prix and GPC, and they sold it off for a lower price. And then over here, they took the stuff that was in the middle, and they put it in this pile, and they called that Marlboro. They called it Camel. They call it Newports. For about, I don't know, 30, 40 years, we were calling it lights. We had Camel lights, Marlboro lights, Rich lights, Golden lights. We had lights. I'm going to step out of the screen for just a second here, because I got some of the original pack. This is a Marlboro lights, and this is a Camel lights. So we had lights packs back then. And so we asked, how did we get rid of lights? Well, what they asked us, the tobacco companies, well, why did you put lights on there? So what is a lighter flavor? And they also said that all this material that's in between the stems and the seeds was more fine tobacco. So whenever those advertised, like Lucky Strikes tried to say my mighty fine tobacco, well, that meant that there wasn't the roughage and the seeds in it. And so kids used that philosophy for a long time, maybe 40 years, that they would say, well, if it was the stems and seeds in the bag, they'd say, oh, that's swag, that's ditch weed, I'm not going to buy that. But if it was the fine stuff it didn't have in there, oh, that's some good weed, I'll give you whatever you want. What do you want a good price for that? You know, and so that was the philosophy. But really, you ask the tobacco companies, they said it meant it's a lighter flavor. And then you ask the kids and the smokers, and all smoking, what does lights mean? And they all said, well, that means it's better for you. So they thought that lights meant it was better for you, when the reality was it wasn't better for you. And so now that we talked about that, I'm going to erase some of this stuff. Now, I told you when I started that I got a tumor. Now, one thing that we do in all these groups with kids is kids are always yawning and stretching, especially yawning. And no matter what time of the day is, if in the morning they're yawning, afternoon, maybe if they did some energy drinks or something, they're yawning, so they're yawning and stretching. And as they do, there's a treatment assignment now for yawning and stretching. And I would say, oh, he got high, she got high, he got high. So every time somebody yawns, I point them out and I say, you got high, and then I just keep going on with my presentation. You got high, you got high, you got high. So the purpose of this whole presentation, yawning and stretching, is getting high. There's no purpose in our bodies for yawning and stretching other than getting high. You store the most dopamine right here in your jaw muscle, very powerful muscle. When you yawn, you release that dopamine, fills up with oxygen and fluid, goes to the brain, bam! Automatic shot of adrenaline. Yawning's getting high. The next time you yawn, you think about what that did for you, unless if you're trying to prepare to get to sleep. But mostly people use yawning to get high, to get up, to get an upper, right? And then now for the other part of that, you got the uppers and the downers and the painkillers. So let's say painkillers, for the purpose of this video, here's a line right here, which is a pathway. And so there's always somebody in these rooms. Everybody's got pathways, nerve pathways all up and down. And so I don't know if you can see it, but let's say this is a pathway. And then there's these dots on both sides of the pathway. And for the 7th and 8th graders, that is our receptor sites. So those are receptor sites. And so what happens is, just like we talked about in the first section, hopefully you can go back and watch that. But so you have natural pain blockers that block that pain. That's what they're doing. Then they go back in and they recharge. And then they come out and they block the pain, and then they recharge and they block the pain, like we showed in the first part of this video. They block the pain, they recharge. So if there's someone in the room who's got their arms crossed, they block the pain, or their legs, they recharge, they block the pain, and then when it's uncomfortable, they switch and go like that, and then they block the pain. As soon as they start losing them all, they keep doing this. If you think about it, you're in pain all day long. You're like this and this and this and this. Have you ever gone to sleep on your back and woke up on your side, or gone to sleep on your side and woke up on your stomach? You're not dead. You're just sleeping. And at some point, the brain said you need to move, right? But then you will move. Now, what painkillers do, and it could be Advil, Aleve, acetaminophen, ibuprofen, Suboxone, methadone, alcohol can be a painkiller, marijuana can be a painkiller, a lot of things can be a painkiller. Some of them are powerful, some not so powerful, but when they're very powerful and they get in your body, here's what they do. Block, 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 block. That's what they do, all right? So, the good news is if you're a single parent, you got to lift a laundry basket and do some things, or you got to sit in a chair all day and do your job. They'll give you 500 milligrams of ibuprofen or something. You'll be able to block that pain. The bad news is that people who do painkillers, they re-injure themselves all the time because they're doing something stupid that they don't know it's stupid because the pain's being blocked. The number one place that people who do painkillers injure themselves is in bed. You're like, that doesn't even make any sense. No, number one place. Now, there's all kinds of places people injure themselves on painkillers, like a bricklayer. They're not going to give you painkillers if you're a bricklayer because they know you're really going to screw up your back, laying bricks and block and so forth. But in bed is the number one place, by and large, that most people injure themselves and re-injure themselves. And you're like, well, how is that even possible? And the answer is they don't move when they're supposed to move. The brain is saying move, and they didn't move. So they're laying in the same position way too long, and they're breaking down muscles and tendons and joints, arteries. A lot of things are not doing very well because they lay in that same position way too long. When the brain said move, they didn't move. All right. Now another example of the stimulant. So we did the uppers, downers, and the painkillers, and that is we'll do the stimulants. I went out and talked to a track team, and I don't know if people watching this video, but there's a town out on Highway 94, north of St. Cloud, west of St. Cloud, called Albany. I went out there and talked to the track team, and I said, you're going to get in shape quicker than any track team in your conference. I'm not saying you're going to win. I'm just saying you're going to get in shape real quick. And like, well, how am I going to do that? So they started on Friday for some reason. I said, you run, just get exhausted. Go down to that meat place, get all the steaks and the potatoes, that good stuff, eat that up, and after a little while, just go to bed. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to stay up all night and play video games. No, you're not. Take all that stuff and then go to sleep, go to bed. Why would I do that? Just go ahead and do it. Okay, fine, I'll do it. So when they went to sleep, all right, what happens when you go to sleep to a 7th and 8th grader, your brain says, what did I do today? What do I need for tomorrow? That's what your brain is saying. What did I do today? What do I need for tomorrow? Well, they're trying to get in shape. They're trying to build muscle and so forth. So these cells, which are these certain amount of the uppers, they're going to split and double, split and double, split and double, split and double. They're going to wake up with a whole lot more cells than when they went to sleep that night because the brain says we need them, and so they're going to split and double. Then the next day they go out and they work out, they get really exhausted, they got really tired, they went and ate all that good stuff so they can fill the cells with not sugar and syrup and junk, but fill them with good things, good stuff that's going to make them cells solid. And so then they went to sleep that night, and the brain said, what did I do today? What do I need for tomorrow? Well, we need more of these here again. We're trying to build some muscle and so forth. So these cells are going to split and double, split and double, split and double, split and double. They're going to, now this is a gross exaggeration of cells, but for a 7th grader it helps. They're going to wake up with 5,000 of these cells, 50,000, 100,000, 500,000. They're going to wake up with all these cells that they didn't have when they started because that's what the brain and the body's doing. Now, when people go on vacation and they're runners and they say, well, I got out of shape so quick, I just don't know how that happened. I say, well, what were you putting in the cells to begin with? Because a lot of true distant athletes, they do what they call taper. And even the night before, they'll go out and they'll just have this big carb feed and they'll eat tons of pancakes or spaghetti or something like that so that all those cells are full the next morning when they go run. And that's all they needed was to get through that one day's event. They wouldn't do that every day, but they did it on that day. And so now that we've talked about all that, and this is what getting in shape is, we got to talk about, let's say your buzz, let's say your chemical of choice. And now if you watch this video, this is about prevention and you don't have a chemical of choice, that's good. But let's say that it's alcohol. Let's say it's some pills or whatever. And so you do one pill, one pipe, one drink, one whatever, and you just did it, and in your brain it looks like that. And your brain says, all right, we're going to live, we're going to survive, we're not going to die, we're going to be okay. Now in order to get a buzz, you got to have two. So you go ahead and you take two, you pop 2 pills, you drink 2, you got 2 shots, you did 2 or whatever you did, and your brain says, all right, we're going to live, we're going to survive, we're not going to die, we're going to be okay. Now in order to get a buzz, you got to have 3. So you go ahead and you take 3, or you pop 3 pills, you drink 3 shots, 3 beers, 3 whatever it is, and your brain says, all right, we're going to live, we're going to survive, we're not going to die, we're going to be okay. Now let's take this up to the most chemicals that you ever seen somebody do or you yourself did do. Let's say you just did a bucket load of very high potent chemicals, and it's all the way up to that right there. And the person lived. They said, I'm not going to die, I'm going to survive. And they got all those chemicals in their brain right there. And the brain says, you know, I'm quitting now. I'm going to go clean and sober. I'm done with this. I'm going to go to a treatment program. I'm going to go to Narcotic Anonymous. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm getting a sponsor. I'm doing this. And I'm going to stay away from all this stuff. I'm not doing it anymore. So they go clean and sober away from any drug for 3 years or 4 years. Now, after all that, something happens, and they say, you know what? I'm just going to have me one little drink, one little pipe. Let's say a death in the family, a divorce, a child dies, something happened, and they say, I'm just going to have me one little thing. So they go for one little thing. Now, if their brain doesn't know that they're going for that buzz or a level of buzz, they probably won't be able to get a buzz for a little while. They will. But as soon as the brain realizes that they're going for that old buzz the way it used to be, they will go back to that old tolerance almost instantly. Usually within a week, they go back to that old tolerance that they had. They can't be drinking and using like when they were in high school or whatever. They go back to a massive tolerance, and that is to protect them from death. And they're like, well, wait a minute, how could that be protecting me from death? Because if all you're used to is a tiny little bit of a chemical right there, and you go and you do that much potency of a drug in your brain, you're going to die. You're going to overdose and die, because that's way more than what you're used to. Like I said, potency can kill you. But if you're used to the chemical, this is what way massive potency would look like, and so your brain will go back to you being able to survive. Now, doctors call that biochemical memory, but it's just your memory. Your memory remembers the point that you were way back, the most drug you ever did, and you'll be able to go all the way back to those chemicals just like that, just to protect you from death, because otherwise you're going to overdose and die. So now you understand an overdose. Well, all of our bodies, if you did that much chemical, right, we're supposed to be, everybody generally is 120 over 80, 60 to 80 beats in a minute. That's a general thing for a lot of people, and that's your pulse and your blood pressure. Well, if you've got, let's say, 60 to 80 beats in a minute, and you're pumping stuff out of your heart up into your brain, the three most important organs in your body is your brain, your heart, and your lungs. You can live without fingers and toes and other things, but you got to have those for sure. And brain being the most important. So when you get all that potency up in your brain, your heart's going to start pounding if it's a stimulant. A stimulant, your heart will start pounding and flush that stuff out. Now, in a depressant, in a downer, there's a lot of chemical makeup of downers that actually slow your heart to where it would stop and you die from the chemical is going to slow your heart. You might go, and then go for a while without a breath, and then go for a while without a breath, and you could die at that. That's what you could die from doing the downer. Or if it's so potent, you've never done it, you just might stop breathing almost. You could. I mean, people have overdosed that quick. But in this case, we're talking about stimulants like energy drinks and so forth. The primary, a lot of young people prefer stimulants over the other ones, because they love to get jacked. And so this is what a stimulant. Well, if you got 120, all of a sudden you go bam, way up to 120, flushing out of your heart, pounding, 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 and then 68 beats in a minute, it's up to 120 of fluid and oxygen going up to your brain to flush out that chemical. You better have a whole lot coming in, because if you don't, you get what they call a myocardial infarction. It's a fancy word for a heart attack, and you're going to die. Unless if you get to the hospital real quick, you're going to blow a little hole in your heart right there. And so that's right there. That's what an overdose is. And now this is also what makes chemicals a disease. A lot of kids say, well, what makes chemicals a disease? And I say, well, it's progressive, it's pathological, it keeps growing, it keeps getting worse. And when you quit for a really long time and you relapse on it, you go back to that old tolerance almost instantly, that's a disease. And the kids say, well, wait a minute now, if that's a disease, then video games is a disease, pornography is a disease, gambling is a disease. They say, no, them are addictions. I mean, gambling, you can go crazy and lose all your money, but it's not going to cause neurotransmitters to shut down and disappear. You're not going to lose them. And so now that we talked about this and diseases and overdoses, you understand what a disease is, what an overdose is, you understand the yawning and stretching. And I will say, talk a little bit about medications and how I got my tumor and how any one of you can get something. Let's say you're doing some chemical and in your lungs, all right, you've got celiac. So when you cough, you shake things loose. Well, the heat from, if you're doing some chemical, or the tar, if you're doing that chemical, or if you're vaporizing something, whatever in that, and I set that down. So if you're doing some vaporizing of some whatever it is, then that gets lodged and stuck in your lung right there. Okay, you got a little ball. Now, if you get tumors and cancers, generally one of these four things is going to be involved. Now, an oncology doctor will say, well, you can't say that, but when you got a 7th and 8th grader, we're talking about this, one of these four things is going to be involved. So I'm telling you, how did I get a brain tumor right now? LDLs is low density lipoproteins, triglycerides, old dead tissue cells, and old dead blood cells. So we're going to break right now. Section 2, part 2 is over and done with, and we're going to talk right now about how you can get tumors and cancers from doing this stuff.